You're about to hear episode 4 of the Magical Mystery Talk, and after we'd recorded this one, Matt and Desiree decided that they had a whole load more information to drop than we got round to in this episode. So for anyone wanting to take a deeper dive into all this, and if 2 hours leaves you craving even more information on what we're talking about today, there's going to be a bonus episode, a part 2, available on the usual platforms for anyone who wants to absorb all of that. So do watch out for the bonus episode, available in due course. And that being said, let's get into episode 4 proper. Episode 4 of the Magical Mystery Talk, and this is another anniversary episode. It's kind of a somber occasion, but that's rather fitting for 2020, isn't it? Because we're just about on the 40th anniversary of the assassination of John Lennon, December the 8th, 1980, in the US date format, and it was the morning of December the 9th, 1980 in UK format, tying into the 9s once again, as we got into in the last show. So 40 years on, boy, I've got vivid memories myself of hearing that news. My dad was very upset about it because he was a John Lennon fan. I can remember the radio news bulletins just being full of this story, and I can remember the charts in 1980 as well. John Lennon's Just Like Starting Over, which had just been released off of Double Fantasy, shot to the number 1 spot. And everyone thought it was going to be Christmas number 1 that year, but it wasn't, because it was beaten by the St. Winifred School Choir with There's No One Quite Like Grandma, which has got to be one of the biggest musical travesties ever. And then after Christmas, there were 2 more Lennon songs. Imagine got to number 1. That was 9 years old by that point. And then Woman, another track from Double Fantasy. But he missed out on the Christmas number 1 1980, which is tragic. But anyway, Matt and Desiree are here with me, and they've been doing a lot of swatting up on this most momentous of events, and we've got a whole lot to get through today. So welcome back, guys.
Hello, hello.
There's no one quite like Grandma.
And you know, this will probably mean very little to nothing to any American listeners who've hopefully never heard that song before.
For the benefit of for the benefit of the US guys, type in St. Winifred School Choir and just take a look. And you'll see what beat Lennon to number 1 in December 80. What?
Wow. It's like Joe Dolce, Shut Up in Your Face, keeping Ultravox Vienna off number 1 famously as well, isn't it?
And I bought both of those.
Oh, my days. Well, where do we start with this one? We're trying to keep some loose framework to this whole thing, but I know from the notes that we've exchanged between us that this one shoots off all over the place and darts off in so many different directions, so we're in for a roller coaster ride here. We did think that we might try and start by looking at Mark David Chapman, who is said to be Lennon's assassin, and we should probably delve into some of his character, I guess, before we get onto the day itself. So where should we start here?
Well, I would like to say before we start, if I may, that I'm thoroughly disappointed that I missed your guys' last podcast on John Lennon's anniversary of his birth. And but you guys did an awesome job, and I was really impressed with your work on that. And you guys kept it very respectful and nice and wonderful, and I appreciate that. But I have a feeling that this topic in particular is not going to go over so well with a lot of listeners. I know that I did a pretty well organized effort on one of my articles, and I got quite a bit of hate mail from that. So this topic is not, in my opinion at least, not very well discussed, because I feel like a lot of people take this event of John Lennon's murder and kind of stick their fingers in their ears and la their way out of it, because they don't want to question it. They don't want to know much more about it, but there is a lot of discrepancies and just weird coincidences and just weird things that have gone on with this investigation. It actually wasn't even an investigation. It was like case closed. They didn't even investigate it. So I wanted to say, first of all, thank you to you guys for doing such a lovely show for his birthday. And I think that this topic is just as equally, if not more so, important. But it might not be quite as respectful as you guys did. So I just wanted to start out by saying that.
It's a real button pusher, this subject, isn't it, for people?
It really is. People get very offended, and I mean, it's a sad story. It's a tragic ending to John Lennon's life there, and it seems to me people just don't want to hear it. So.
Sure.
And I don't understand why people are so offended. I mean, Beatles fans. I mean, I haven't come across this myself personally, but I know I know you, Desiree, have come across, as you say, you've mentioned yourself, you've come across this animosity through your website, through articles, and I know other Beatles fans that are kind of podcasters, but they're not in the alternative, quote unquote, avenues of things, but within the mainstream, and they bring up the subject of Mark David Chapman and mind control and CIA, and they themselves have said that they get a lot of hate mail back and a lot of bad vibes from Beatles fans, and I just don't understand why. I mean, surely you're not desecrating the memory of John Lennon by suggesting that Mark David Chapman might have been an intel services driven assassin. I can't see why that's offensive to a Beatles fan, because, as I say, you're not desecrating the memory of John Lennon at all.
You're not. What I truly think is the whole deal with that is that right away, once Mark David Chapman was arrested and the news broke and all of that, they went right in to say that the only reason he did this was his claim to fame. Like, that's the only reason why he decided to shoot John Lennon, was he wanted to become famous himself. So right there, all of those Beatles fans were like, okay, we, never mention his name, pretend it doesn't exist, because we don't want to make him famous for this, right? His whole intention behind the murder, supposedly. So I think that just with that announcement that was his only goal in all of this, it made everybody kind of like, okay, well, it never happened. He didn't exist. So we'll never speak of him again. And so it kind of cut that, inquiry by the masses as to what exactly happened right then and there, because the Beatles fans didn't want to even acknowledge his name, let alone anything that he did or what he was about or, any of that. So
it's such a pointless reason for it, though, just putting it down to him being a lone nut that wanted to be famous. It's an outrageous reason for somebody to be taken out. Whereas if you accept that Chapman showed all the signs of being an MK Ultra mind control assassin, at least it puts some reason for Lennon being taken out. It makes more sense of why he was than the completely senseless story that it was just a deranged fan.
Right. Or even that he was just crazy and, schizophrenic, which there has been some questions, but he was tried. He pled guilty and was, deemed capable of standing trial for on his own account and not insane. So he was examined by 9 psychiatrists, if I'm not mistaken, before he stood in court for his preliminary hearing. And all 9 psychiatrists, if I'm not mistaken, all of them said he was fit to stand trial. They found no signs of, any psychosis. Right. They diagnosed him with personality disorders, but nothing, not schizophrenia, not anything that wouldn't let him be fit for standing trial.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then he just pled guilty. So there was no investigation. There was no real trial. He pled guilty and then given his sentence, and then that was it.
Yeah.
So, nobody got to hear any testimony. There wasn't any testimony. There wasn't any witness accounts. There wasn't anything like that, because it was a closed case. that was it.
Of course,
they got their person.
This flies in the face of the constant narrative that we always get whenever Mark David Chapman has been spoken about, whether it's in a news bulletin or in an article or whatever, since 1980 to now. Whenever his name is mentioned in a news report or whatever, it always comes with the added narrative, crazed lone nut who was seeking to be famous.
Right.
And as some people have argued, and I think quite convincingly, it's a good case to put forward, if he wanted to seek fame, if that was his motive behind wanting to kill Lennon, then surely he would have pled not guilty, which would have then given him the biggest stage possible, i.e., as some people have dubbed it would have been, the trial of the century. He killed one of the most famous men of the 20th century, one of the most famous men ever in entertainment, and he decided to plead guilty, which then denied him the chance to be able to get on the TV. I mean, can you imagine if there'd have been a trial? It would have been 24-hour TV. It would have been constant press reports.
Been bigger than OJ.
Would have been bigger. It would have been much bigger than OJ.
Right.
So, and he passed that down. He didn't take that chance. He didn't take that opportunity. So, if he was seeking fame, then he blew it. Then,
there are some parallels here with Sirhan Sirhan, aren't there? That you were drawing attention to in the chat thread. The alleged assassin of Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the psychiatrists, one of the 9 psychiatrists that examined him was, I can't remember the man's name. I think it was Bernard Diamond. Is it Bernard Diamond? His name
Yep, Dr. Bernard Diamond, yep.
Yeah, he was one of the doctors, correct me if I'm wrong, who was actually involved in the Sirhan Sirhan case. So he was one of the doctors. If you want to look at suspicious or little signposts or little red flags, that's a potential red flag that one of the 9 psychiatrists that examined Mark David Chapman before this hearing where he decided to plead guilty. One of those 9 doctors was Bernard Diamond, and and if you look at Sirhan, you've got it's pretty much a kind of similar MO to Mark David Chapman, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, so
and
he claims he can't remember a thing about what happened all these years later.
Yeah, the woman in the polka dot dress, isn't it? Or with Sirhan Sirhan.
And then you've got John Hinckley Jr., who was the would-be assassin of Ronald Reagan. And,
right. So
there's some connections there to Chapman as well, or some overlap.
Yeah, that one's actually pretty interesting. So when Chapman was arrested, he had said that he actually had like a hit list of several other people. So if John Lennon didn't work out, he was going to go down the list. And one of those people that was on his list was Ronald Reagan, which is interesting because only a couple of months later, Ronald Reagan was shot and by John Hinckley Jr. there. And it's also said that John Hinckley Jr. also had a copy of The Catcher in the Rye in his possession at the time, which obviously Mark David Chapman also had an obsession with this Catcher in the Rye. So, interesting to note there too is John Hinckley Jr. and Mark David Chapman were both born in 1955, only like 19 days away from each other. So they were pretty much almost exactly the same age, and both born in Texas, Fort Worth, Texas, for Mark David Chapman there, which is George Bush country. I don't know if we want to get into that, but yeah, just some interesting correlations between the two assassins there.
Sure.
I mean, I can't remember when the attempted assassination on Reagan. It was very early to mid 1981. So it was only a few months after the Lennon incident.
Yeah.
Right.
And of course, John Hinckley. Another thing that was widely connected to the John Hinckley assassination attempt was John Hinckley's apparent obsession with the movie actress Jodie Foster.
Right.
And that was a leading factor, as the mainstream media said at the time, reported at the time. It was a leading factor in his desire to shoot President Reagan. But what's not so widely reported is that Hinckley also had a bit of an obsession with John Lennon. For example, if my research isn't misleading me, apparently during Hinckley's trial for the assassination attempt, the court was told that in February 1981, he'd actually stood outside the Dakota Building on the spot where John Lennon had been shot, and he had a gun in his pocket, and he wanted to, and I quote unquote, he wanted to destroy himself. I've actually got the report here. I've taken a photocopy of it. I've got it on paper here. And according to mainstream news reports, in May 1981, shortly after the attempt on Reagan's life, so yeah, it was mid-1981, law officials had revealed after interviews with Hinckley that he was, and I quote, obsessed with the death of John Lennon, and in his mind binded together the slain Beatles star and Jodie Foster. He was quoted as saying, "My life is screwed up. The world is even more screwed up. I don't know why people want to live. John Lennon is dead. I still think about Jodie all the time. That's all I think about, really. That and John Lennon's death. They were sort of binded together. They were sort of binded together before December the 8th. They've been binded together since last summer, really. John and Jodie have been binded together with me, and now one of them's dead." And when they investigated Hinckley's hotel room, they reportedly found a number of books. And one of those books was about John Lennon. And the other one was, of course, The Catcher in the Rye, which is the so-called, as researchers have pointed out, it was possibly the trigger book for Mark David Chapman as well. It was the book that was found when the police arrived at the Dakota after Lennon had been shot, and Mark David Chapman standing there. That's what he's reading. And of course, he later said, and he still says, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he does keep saying that this book was, he wanted to become the character in the book, Holden Caulfield, right, who saw everybody as a phony. That this is a book. It's not a disturbing book. I mean, you'd think if you hadn't read it, it would be a disturbing book, seeing as it seems to be a trigger for all these, assassins or would-be assassins. But if you actually read the book, it's basically a story about a 15, 16-year-old upper middle class, maybe higher than that, student who's at boarding school in America, and he just sees everybody as phonies, as superficial. Like, for example, he'll go and watch a movie in a cinema, in a movie theater, and he'll watch the actor performing in the movie, and he'll say to himself, yeah, he's a good movie actor, but he's a bit of a phony because he knows he's a good actor and it's coming through in his performance and he's trying to cover it. He's a bit superficial. That's the running theme in the book, that Holden Caulfield, this 15, 16-year-old, sees everybody as a phony. So this is what, this is the theme that Mark David Chapman had, which we're told, well, according to mainstream reports, we're told that Mark David Chapman perceived John Lennon to be this phony. John Lennon had been, to his eyes, whether this is true or not, or whether he's been mind controlled to think this, or whether this is just the mainstream media pushing this narrative. I mean, he said it himself in the few interviews he's been in, that Mark David Chapman perceived John Lennon to be a phony, basically, because he'd always been, since the late 60s, early 70s especially, he'd been held up to be this peace campaigner who was out to campaign for the downtrodden man, against the establishment. And then towards 1980, and in 1980, we're told that Mark David Chapman started to read books and magazine articles about Lennon and discovered actually that John Lennon was a very wealthy man. He had lots of properties. He was living in this palatial apartment at the Dakota. And it was at that point that Mark David Chapman said to himself, this guy is a phony. He's not this peacenik.
Champagne socialist.
He's a champagne socialist. He's a phony. It's all an act. And at the same time, he started to read The Catcher in the Rye as well, with this phony kind of theme running around it. So that's what made him go and kill Lennon. I think one of the statements he made, and it might have been in court actually, he said, I wanted to push the message of Holden Caulfield and The Catcher in the Rye, this book. I wanted to make it a world-known subject, a world-known book, and to do that, I killed John Lennon in order to make that happen. That's what he said. That's one of the many things that he said. But yeah, back to Hinckley. He's kind of linked in with this book. So
you were right about the date, by the way, Matt. It was 30th of March. I just looked it up in 81.
It was the 30th of March.
And I've just got some photos of John Hinckley, and he looks disturbingly like Mark David Chapman. There's a definite resemblance there.
Indeed. Yes, actually, yeah. So would I be reaching it if I was to say that both these men were fostered, maybe even from birth, if not from early childhood, to become what they became, and that either one of them could have switched? It could have been Mark David Chapman that could have been picked to shoot Reagan, and it could have been Hinckley to shoot Lennon. I mean, judging by what you say, Desiree, about the Reagan thing and Mark David Chapman, and also Hinckley and him standing outside the Dakota and having books about Lennon in his room and The Catcher in the Rye, it could very possibly have been the case.
It could have been like a backup plan, you know, if Chapman failed, then the other one would have been in place, and vice versa, or who knows how these people think.
Indeed.
Or do.
So Lennon was removed just before Reagan took up his presidency, which is interesting. It was the last days of Jimmy Carter, I guess.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. December. So Reagan would have just been elected. So he would have been the president-elect, and then going into office officially January 81.
Right.
So, and this would be the reason. This is one of the reasons that a number of researchers would say that this is one of the reasons that if it was an intel assassination, this is one of the reasons why they would have wanted Lennon taken out, because the Reagan administration, or perhaps maybe not even Reagan himself, maybe his vice president George H.W. Bush, an ex-CIA head, he was the head of the CIA in 1976. They would have perceived Lennon to have been a threat. I mean, there are cynics who have, I mean, you know, you read these sort of chat forums and stuff where this kind of subject is debated and chatted about. And the cynics will say that the cynics that are against this argument, this intel assassination argument, will say, well, you know, yeah, but Lennon, you know, he wasn't a threat. You know, he was just a pop singer. He was just a pop star. Right. But he was the biggest star in the world. He wasn't just a pop singer. He and the Beatles together had changed culture.
Right.
They weren't just musicians. I mean, you know, back in the late 60s when he recorded Give Peace a Chance, it became the anthem for the anti-Vietnam War movement. I think it was sung outside a protest. I can't remember what year it was, but it was sung outside the White House by thousands of people.
Right.
They didn't sing We Shall Overcome or any other of the older anthems. They sang Give Peace a Chance. And that just kind of indicates the kind of power that John Lennon had.
Right. Lots of influence over the younger crowd. Right.
Yes.
You know, the younger generation. And that's the ones that they seemingly at least were afraid of, because they had a huge movement going that could have easily taken out, you know, the older mindset and the Vietnam War. They're being drafted like left and right. And, you know, people were very unhappy. And so that younger generation had a huge voice. And it was almost like John Lennon was in a lot of ways leading that movement. People
he
were
was
looking
one of
up
the
to
few,
him.
wasn't he?
Right.
I mean, he was one of the few well-known stars that was actually really doing it. Other artists were singing songs about it, but Lennon was actually getting engaged. And this worried Nixon at the time. Again, if you want to argue against the cynic who said, oh, he was just a pop star, we could say, well, yeah, he was a pop star, but he was actually doing something about it. And if you look what was going on in the early 70s, especially when he came to America, and before he came to America, he was in Britain, he was doing the bed-ins. It was very much, he was campaigning, but it was more of an ideological thing. It was more talking about it and writing songs about it. But whereas when he came to the US, he got engaged with a lot of the so-called quote unquote radical protesters, the radical movement, such as the Black Panthers. and so on and so on, and the women's lib movement, and so many others. And I know we spoke about this, Mark, before. We chatted about this on the Lennon.
Trying to work out how sincere he may have been, if this was, coming from the heart, or if he was put up to it as some kind of agenda. We were really trying to make sense of all that on that show, because we just concluded that he was such an enigma, such a difficult character to understand.
But one of the things also that came out, and this was in the press at the time, back in the early 70s, John Lennon was posing the idea and kind of announcing to the public that what he wanted to do, and this was in 1971, 72. When was the election? Was it 72 when Nixon was coming up for re-election? I think it was 72 or
72 it would have been, yeah.
Yeah. Around that time, I might be wrong, but from what I remember, from what I can recall from reading various books and stuff, I think that the age of voting was going to be lowered. So there was going to be a younger demographic that was allowed to vote, which meant that, in terms of the counterculture, the so-called counterculture, people that were into rock music and fans of John Lennon, there would have been more, in terms of votes. If you wanted to sway the vote, John Lennon would have had, basically, President Nixon was worried. Okay, what was going on was John Lennon was putting it out that he was planning to do, in conjunction with these upcoming elections, what he was planning to do was to take out a US-wide concert tour, either an all-star concert tour with him being the headline, I guess, or if he couldn't get the all-stars to take place, if he couldn't get these various musicians to take part, he would then do it himself and take this concert tour around the US in order to, and then this is in his words, to radicalize the audience, to get them to engage, to get them to look at radical politics, quote unquote, radical politics. So we're talking anti-Vietnam movement, we're talking Black Panthers, we're talking women's lib, we're talking even Irish, the IRA, we're talking, really, really radical anti-establishment kind of issues. And one of his ideas, and again he posed this, one of his ideas was to go around the US with this concert tour thing, and in the foyer of the auditoriums and the theatres, he wanted people to turn up, say, like the Black Panthers and so on, various radical groups to turn up from these local radical groups from wherever the concert was going, to turn up and basically hand out leaflets. And this worried President Nixon. This is what got the FBI to finally, the FBI to actually monitor John Lennon and to try and throw him out of the US, because President Nixon, and this is according to people that were there at the time that have since said this, President Nixon was absolutely shit scared, because with the lowering of the voting, this opened up the voting to people who would have been into John Lennon, into the Beatles, into the anti-Vietnam, anti-President Nixon kind of...
I was just going to add in there, and who was the head of the CIA at that time? That would have been W. Bush.
That's right.
Yeah, that was in 1976.
So he was...
Yeah, I think that was a little bit
very,
later.
very much.
So if you think about the timing of this, by 1980, Lennon really wasn't much of a threat anymore, because he'd taken 5 years off to become a house husband to raise Sean. He'd just put out Double Fantasy, but it wasn't full of radical revolutionary tracks. It was just full of nice songs. And Nixon was long gone by 1980, so Lennon was nowhere near as much of a threat then as he had been earlier in the 70s. So you'd think if they'd wanted to take him out, the time to do it would have been back in the 70s, which does make me wonder how connected it was to the Reagan-Bush administration incoming, in that they left it until 1980.
Well, the thing is, what happened was, with that tour, it was that tour that got Nixon really, really scared. And what he did was, that's when the deportation proceedings against John Lennon started. They tried to deport John Lennon, and they used the excuse, and it was a flimsy excuse, because it wasn't standing up, because John Lennon fought this in court and won in the end. He won in 1975, but he kept fighting, and it was a flimsy case. Basically, there were the US deportation, the immigration service of the US was using this flimsy excuse that John Lennon had been busted for drugs in England in 1968 or 69, whenever it was, for a bit of dope. They were using that as the basis to throw him out of the US, because John Lennon wanted to stay in the US and he wanted a visa, but they were threatening to take his visa away and throw him out. And it soon transpired that it wasn't that the reason they actually wanted him to get out was because he was getting involved in all this radical politics. So he got a lawyer involved, a guy by the name of Leon Wilds. And what Leon Wilds said to John Lennon was, and by this point, the FBI started to bug John Lennon. They were following him. They were wiretapping him. They were doing everything they possibly could to throw him out. And they were just looking for something to happen, like a drug, like maybe, he takes some drugs and they can sort of plant him with some kind of like false drug bust or whatever. So what Leon Wilds said to him was, his lawyer, the guy who got involved to try and keep him in the US. He said to him, look, John, if you want to stay here, what you've got to do is you have to stop messing around and hanging around with these radical politicians, right? Stop it. Just stop it all. Just put it to the back and forget about it, okay? No more speeches to the media about the Black Panthers or Nixon or Vietnam or whatever, and stop hanging around with these people. So that's why he stopped. So if you look, 1972, you notice from 1972, well, maybe 1973 to 1980, as you say, Mark. If you notice, there's virtually nothing that John Lennon talks about that's political. It's back to the music, it's back to recording, it's back to being a regular, singer, songwriter, what have you.
That's right.
Now, what happened was, on the face of it, Mark, it does look like in 1980. That he'd recorded Double Fantasy, and the songs are all about, being a dad, being a father, being a husband, and living this kind of quiet life away from the music business, which he had been doing for 5 years. Because after he got his green card in 1975, he just stopped making music and kind of backed out. But as Yoko Ono has since attested, on the week he was shot, he'd been scheduled to participate in a street demonstration. And this was in San Francisco. And this was over workers' rights. So this was his first activity of this type since the early 1970s. And there's also rumours, and I haven't been able to confirm this, but there's also rumours that he was planning to participate in anti-nuclear demonstrations and protests as well. And I've read that particular claim in a few places, but I haven't been able to confirm it, and that's a bit of a shame. But that's huge. Now, what I also didn't know until quite recently is he got his green card in 1975, his US resident alien card, in other words. But in 1981, had he survived, then he would have been eligible to take it to the next step, which would have been full US citizenship. So can you imagine, if he'd have got the full US citizenship and then he'd started doing these anti-nuclear demonstrations and all these marches that he was planning, there would have been no way the Reagan and Bush would have not have been able to throw him out of the country. That would have been it. So he was taken out before that happened.
And he would have had surveillance all over him, so they would have known that was in his plans.
Yeah, exactly.
We should probably circle back round to Chapman then. And directly before this event, he'd been doing a lot of travelling around the world, ostensibly as part of this charity. Was it World Vision? Is that what it was called?
Yeah, so World Vision, and he was also part of the YMCA as well. It's all a little fuzzy. I don't know if Matt has kind of honed in on that a little bit more or not, but
you're right. It's fuzzy, isn't it?
It's very fuzzy. The whole, honestly, this whole entire subject really is.
He travelled widely, but money never seemed to be a problem.
Right. So it's not just like he, visited the normal places, Paris and London, and those kinds. He literally went. I have a list here. He went to Tokyo, Hong Kong, Singapore, Bangkok, Delhi, Beirut, Geneva, London, Paris, Dublin. I mean, everywhere within a 3-week period, or maybe it was 6 weeks period. But, like boom, 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 all right after another, literally went and took a tour around the world. And there's no, he was like a vagabond. He didn't have money. I don't know how he afforded to do these things, but apparently they were with World Vision. But World Vision isn't in all of those places either. It's very stranch.
World Vision is CIA front, do we think?
That's what it
kind
of seems like.
Yeah, well, the thing with the YMCA is, and World Vision, because YMCA and the World Vision thing seem to be hand in hand. Wow, yeah. What happened was, Mark David, I think, I don't know where to start. Do you know that?
Yeah.
It's absolutely huge. The thing with the world trip, it's really weird because he was working as a junior employee at the time at a mental institution or a hospital. He'd been. What happened was, this was about 1977, I think it was. He was going through a bit of a crisis, a kind of an emotional crisis, and he wanted to kill himself.
Programming wearing off. Sorry.
I think exactly. He attempted to. He attempted to kill himself.
He attempted to, yeah. Mm-hmm. He called a suicide hotline, and they put him in touch with a psychiatric social worker. And this was when he was living in Hawaii, because he'd hold a job and then he'd lose his job and then he'd get another job and he'd lose the job. So this was in between that kind of, thing where he had a job and he decided to get another job, and he was in Hawaii by this point. It's really odd. I don't know where to start. I really don't. All right. I'll forget that for the minute. Okay, forget that for the minute. Let's start with the YMCA, because this takes us right back to the beginning of his life. Mm-hmm. He joined the YMCA when he was still kind of like in his early teens, I think.
Right. And in Georgia.
In Georgia, and that was through his father, apparently, who introduced him to the YMCA. And interestingly, his father, I think we should point out, was when Mark was born, he was a sergeant in the U.S. Air Force, so in Fort Worth, in Texas. So military. Okay, so I just thought I'd mention that.
Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about.
Yeah, exactly. So so we got nothing military dad. Yeah, exactly. So military dad introduces Mark Chapman to the YMCA, and what was going on was Mark he was a counsellor there. He had a job in the summer camp, and he would do this every year. It was like a something he would do every year at the YMCA. He would be a counsellor for the summer camp for kids. And apparently he was really good at this. The kids loved him. So this was his job.
Kids nicknamed him Nemo, by the way.
Yeah, the kids nicknamed him Nemo because they loved him. He was like a Pied Piper. They absolutely loved him. But what he wanted to do, that was kind of like a part-time kind of job, and he wanted to get a full-time job with the YMCA. And the only way he could do that was to get a university degree, and he didn't have anything near that, so he had to re-enlist in college. He had to go to college. This is a few years later, so I say he joined the YMCA as a child, but when he left school, he became a camp counsellor, and he had to go back to school basically to get the qualifications that he needed to become this, to get a full-time job. And while he was at the YMCA, there was a program that was going on at the time, and I think it's still going now. It's a YMCA program, and it's called ICCP Abroad. It's an international camp counselor program which, quote unquote, works side by side with other local young men of a host country as counselors in a camp or camp-like setting. So it's an international thing. The YMCA basically is a worldwide youth organization. It's Christian heavy, and Mark David Chapman is said to have been a very dedicated Christian, young Christian. And it stands for Young Men's Christian Association. It's one of those non-governmental organizations, an NGO. It's got bases and links to about 120 countries across the world, and it has youth hostels where members of the YMCA can stay, and it does quote unquote humanitarian works around the world. So this is what Mark David Chapman was getting involved with regards to this ICCP Abroad And he could have picked any country in the world, okay? And this was in 1975, so he was 20 years old. He could have picked any country in the world to go to, okay, to do this. He could have gone somewhere nice and hot and warm and sunny and beautiful and lovely. And where does he pick? He picks Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, which at that time was going through some bloody battles.
Yes.
It's a real CIA stronghold, though, Beirut.
Well, exactly. This is the thing. Why would he choose Beirut? It's like a couple of researchers I've looked at have said, look, Mark David Chapman was a born-again Christian, okay? He was a young born-again Christian. So why didn't he choose the Holy Land? If he wanted to go to the Middle East, why didn't he go to the Holy Land and go to Jerusalem or Bethlehem or Nazareth? Why did he choose this very volatile and violent part of the world to go and take part in this program with the YMCA? Yeah, Mark, as you say, CIA. There's a former case officer for the CIA who's made links between YMCA and the CIA. I hope I get his name right. His name is Philip Agee, A-G-E-E. He's a former case officer for the CIA. He was between 1957 to 68, and he's a whistleblower, basically. And he wrote a book titled Inside the Company, CIA Diary, in which he notes, his own personal experiences whilst working for the agency. And he claims that the YMCA was of use to the CIA because it was, in his words, and I'm paraphrasing here, it was, in his words, an advantageous venue in which to widen the agency's range of contacts and potential agents through it. And there's another source I've come across, an author by the name of Bob Woodward. He's a veteran US investigative journalist for the Washington Post.
He's the Watergate
and in
guy,
his book, yes, you're right. Actually, I didn't realize until you said, that's right. Yeah, one of the investigators of that. And in his book, Veil: The Secret Wars of the CIA, 1981 to 87, he claims that in 1976, so this is around the time that Mark David Chapman was there, the CIA was maintaining a large presence in Beirut. That's what was going on there. That's
Miles Copeland was based in Beirut as well, who's the father of Stuart Copeland from The Police, and all three of his sons were born in Beirut, and they all went on to have roles in the music industry. So Copeland was a legendary CIA operative working out of Beirut.
Indeed. Cool. And finally, with regards to this, in the book John Lennon, Life, Times and Assassination by Phil Strongman, I found another reference to Beirut and the CIA. It says Beirut was a major base for CIA and US naval intelligence right up until the 1980s. Beirut was also for years said to have been home to one of the CIA's top secret assassination training camps.
Oh boy!
So that's according to Phil Strongman. And he was only there for a week, and then a civil war broke out, so he had to come back. And then he came back, and then he got involved with Vietnamese refugees, and I think this is where the World Vision link comes in. I'm just looking at my notes here. Boy, if this was TV and you saw the amount of notes I've had to prepare for, it's a huge subject. Absolutely huge.
It's a mess. So
wow.
With World Vision, he worked with David Moore. David Moore was like his. I think he was kind of like a gopher for David Moore, or like a personal assistant type thing. It's not exactly clear, but David Moore was the one around, and with Mark David Chapman, they met high-ranking government officials. I think they even met Gerald Ford at one point. And
he shook his hand, didn't he?
Right. Yes, exactly. And Ford, of course, was also had an attempted assassination as well by Squeaky Fromm from the Manson family. So it's kind of an interesting little segue there. We don't have to get into that. But through David Moore and World Vision, it seems like that somehow that's how they got their the money for all that traveling. They seem to travel together, is kind of what I'm gathering from that. And so David Moore was some kind of a ranking official within the World Vision team there. But again, it's so difficult to really find anything of substance. And it seems like you go from one article to another, and they all have different information. So it's really difficult to discern what is accurate and what is not in a lot of these different ins and outs.
Yeah,
but
I mean, with regards to the World Vision thing, I mean, Desiree, I don't know if you found this, and Mark, but you look on blogs that concentrate on the Lennon assassination, and they mention Mark David Chapman, and then they mention World Vision, and that's where it stops. You don't actually get any kind of confirmation of where this comes from. I haven't been able, all the books and all the magazines and all the articles that I've looked at and owned and read, and I get the names, I see the names linked together on a page, Mark David Chapman, World Vision, but I don't actually get any source links to verify either whether Mark David Chapman is linked to World Vision CIA or whether World Vision is linked to CIA. And I've had to do my own detective work, especially for this podcast, to be able to identify whether there are any actual links at all. And there are links.
Matt, what does
there are, but they either seem to not be available for like, us, the average Joe, or scrubbed, or just not talked about, because you're right, it just stops. And there hasn't been like a detailed biography of Mark David Chapman or anything like that we can kind of look at either, because nobody wants to make him famous. So
what has Mark Lewison said about this, Matt?
Oh, well, he hasn't got that far yet, has he? We could wait another 20 years for that.
He's still stuck in the 60s, is he?
Yeah.
Who's this?
Yeah, 1962.
Mark Lewison, the biographer.
Oh.
But what I've discovered, and I'm not saying that this makes it all true and that Mark David Chapman was Intel assassinator just because I found this particular information. It's up to the listener what I can tell you now, what I'm about to tell you, if you want to hear it, whether, it's up to the listener to judge whether it all links together nicely or not. But what I've been able to find with regards to World Vision, CIA, and Mark David Chapman is basically Mark Chapman in the 1970s, and this would have been after the YMCA Beirut thing. He in conjunction with the YMCA, he went to work at a refugee settlement camp at Fort Chaffee. Is that how you pronounce it? Fort Chaffee in Arkansas. And this was after the end of the Vietnam War, and he was dealing with Vietnamese refugees, a resettlement camp for that. So again, it was this kind of, he's working in a camp counseling kind of sort of environment, and he was just, so the official story goes, what he was doing there was basically he was helping the refugees to acclimatize to a new environment, as it were. He was providing physical and leisure activities for them, for the thousands of refugees that were going there. So the thing with World Vision is, and again, this is according to authors, researchers that have pieced this together and that I've been able to find. It would appear that, according to the research that I've discovered, that the CIA and World Vision were working together, not only with regards to the Vietnam War, but also with Cuba. I've got an article here that states World Vision had a hand in the movement of the Cubans into the United States and other refugees of revolutionary regimes. World Vision was able to recruit out of these mercenary populations people who could be politically tuned and turned to their intelligence purposes. World Vision served as a covert penetration force for the CIA, not as visible as the military actually going in. So they were going in as missionaries and working among the people. And and that's taken from the book Spiritual Warfare by Sarah Diamond. Or is that Sarah Diamond? I don't know. But I've also found another quote, and I'm just flipping through the pages here. in tandem with its food distribution and leadership training for indigenous believers, World Vision has on a number of occasions functioned as an intelligence gathering arm of the US government in the 1970s. In the 70s, World Vision was charged with having collected field data for the CIA in Vietnam after US troops left the region. World Vision played a major role in the administration of refugee camps. And again, if I'm not mistaken, that's also taken from the same book by Sarah Diamond. So, and this would have been around the same time period that World Vision and the CIA would have been up to no good with the refugee camps with regards to Vietnam. And of course, around the same time that Mark David Chapman, of course, would have been involved with refugee camps. Whether Fort Chaffee in Arkansas was one of those, I don't know. I don't know.
It seems seemingly impossible to find that information to know if they're linked or not, but it seems that they are. But as far as
you can also link
World
Hinckley
Vision
to this. Hinckley links to this because John Hinckley's father, John W. Hinckley Sr., who's also known as Jack Hinckley, I think he was a wealthy businessman. He dealt in oil and the gas business. And he was also friendly with the family were friendly with the Bushes. I mean, that's the other thing we haven't mentioned is that on the day that Reagan was shot, the vice president, George H.W. Bush, his son Neil, and this was according to mainstream reports at the time, Neil is claimed to have been all set to host a dinner party at his house with a member of the Hinckley family as his guest, and then it was cancelled after the shooting. So, but yeah, I mean, if you dig deep, you'll find that actually the Hinckley family, parts of the Hinckley family were financing George H.W. Bush's bid to become the vice president.
It's the same with the Bin Ladens one generation later, wasn't it?
I know,
right?
It just never stops with that family, does it?
It just doesn't. They have their fingers in everything, it seems.
And they have their fingers in World Vision. They have their fingers in World Vision because John Hinckley's father, Jack Hinckley, as I say, was a wealthy businessman in the oil and gas business. So that's how he would have known the Bushes, because they were in oil and gas and energy and everything. He also became an active member of World Vision, which apparently, in case anyone doesn't know, it's like a California-based Christian-flavoured relief and development agency. So it's another kind of YMCA in a way, if you like, but they can get into different countries under the guise of so-called quote unquote relief humanitarian aid. They can go to various countries and provide that. So the claim is that the CIA used them, as I said, they used them in order to do that. But yeah, the CIA used them in order to do out their deeds for them covertly. But yeah, apparently Hinckley was not only a donor of World Vision, but he was actually a president of the board of World Vision. So, you can collate all this stuff together and
talking about the CIA, as we have a lot up to now, we should throw Jose Perdomo into the mix. We do need to cover him because he's said to have been a CIA assassin, and he just happens to crop up as the doorman on the Dakota on the night that John Lennon was shot. And there is a school of thought that he may have actually been the assassin rather than Chapman. But I think you may feel that's a bit of a false lead there, don't you, Desiree?
Well, I'm not sure that has been proposed. I don't know that he might have been another assailant, but there is some eerie and strange coincidences. Talking just about World Vision just now, and how Matt said that they were in with the refugee camps from Cuba. Well, that's actually where Perdomo is said to have come from. He was in one of those Cuban refugee camps. That's how he came to the United States in the first place. And after a while became kind of like a leader or like a trainer of sorts, kind of like Mark David Chapman has been said to have been as well. And he was supposedly a part of Operation 40. This is Perdomo now. That was commissioned to try to assassinate Fidel Castro in the 60s. And there's just some interesting correlations with that. And then somehow, in 1980, 15 years later, he's the doorman at the Dakota Building and is one of only, I think there's a total of 4 witnesses of what exactly happened that night. One being John Lennon himself, one being Yoko, one being Mark David Chapman, and the other being Jose Perdomo. So it's interesting, like why a former, CIA informant or assassin or whatnot, why exactly would he be there? Could be a complete coincidence. He retired and this was just something he could do and enjoyed doing, and that's fine. But it's just odd how all of these strange little coincidences and alignments line up, and then it kind of just leaves you scratching your head like, well, that seems to be kind of perfect, odd that it all works out this way. So,
and Operation 40 is said to have been involved in the Kennedy assassination, as was George W. Bush, H.W. Bush. Right. So we're back to him again. These things just keep circling round and round, and Perdomo was part of that team, supposedly. But he's the guy that ran up to Chapman, or is said to have done, and said, "My God, do you know what you've done?" And Chapman is said to have responded, "I've just shot John Lennon," right?
Correct. And supposedly, according to which story you go by, Perdomo either took the gun out of Chapman's hand at the time, or Chapman dropped the gun, and Jose Perdomo kind of kicked it away. And at this time, by that time, we had other people on the scene, and one of the other Dakota employees grabbed the gun, took the gun, and took it off of the scene down into the basement of the Dakota. And waited for the police drive, which came in like 2 minutes. The police were on scene within 2 or 3 minutes of all of this happening. So I'm sure it was a very big, cluster F of a scene. But and it happened in rapid succession. But yes, Jose Perdomo is really the only either suspect or victim on the scene that saw literally everything, and
after that he just kind of
happened to be CIA.
Slinked off and faded into the background, didn't he? There's very little heard of him after that.
Right, he did continue to work there for years and years.
Oh right, okay.
So yeah, he continued to work as the doorman for quite a few years after that.
Oh, right. Okay.
He's not there anymore, but at least I think 8 or 10 years after, he was still there. So just very interesting.
There's some inconsistencies in the accounts of how Lennon was shot as well. He's said to have been shot from behind by Chapman with the bullets coming out through, his chest, the exit wounds. And yet there were some inconsistencies with some of the medical reports, I think, there, which were claiming that he was shot from the front with the exit wounds coming from the rear. So there's discrepancies even with, that aspect of it.
Oh, absolutely. There's a ton of discrepancies. So again, depending on the account that you take into account and believe, there's a host of different interpretations going on. But I think what's really important, I think, to remember when we're talking about this is there was literally no real investigation as to what happened, because they arrested their suspect on site. He pled guilty. There was no real investigation. So all of this is just kind of speculation, and in one way or another. And, that evening we already had, the evening in question, we already had media outlets reporting on exactly what happened. And so it was like that. Those initial media reports are still exactly the same media reports that we get now. They haven't ever changed. Nobody was on site to see. There was no witnesses. Nobody was interviewed. So it's kind of just almost seems like it was like hearsay passed to one to the next. And with that, we have a lot of different, it's kind of like the telephone game. It starts out with one thing. You say something to somebody else, it gets slightly changed, and then they said something else and it gets slightly changed. And so there's a lot of different versions of what exactly happened. But as far as we know, from what was recovered on site, the gun that Chapman used was a .38 Special, which is a 5-shooter gun, and he used hollow tip bullets. So we have the actual bullets that were used. So we're pretty sure that that's true, and we have the gun that was used. So we're pretty sure that that's true, even though it was removed from the crime scene and then brought back later. But that's a different topic. So the coroner, or the medical examiner rather, had said that he believed from the way that the wounds were placed that he was shot at point blank range. So right up on him. It was, he said, his words, a good shot group, which means it wasn't just random. It was like successive, right at one after another. And with a Magnum revolver, which is like a much larger sized revolver. So right there you have a discrepancy. But supposedly Mark David Chapman shot 5 shots, all 5 of his bullets. He used hollow tip bullets, which are supposed to, and I'm not a ballistics expert by any means at all, but this is just from what I've read and from how I understand it. Hollow tip bullets are meant to, as soon as they hit their target, they like mushroom out. And so they're meant to stick inside whatever they hit, so that they're not supposed to produce exit wounds at all. That's the entire point of having hollow tip bullets. And so somehow he managed to get out 5 shots, 4 of them hitting John. 3 of those bullets produced exit wounds, and the bullets were found in his jacket. 1 remained lodged inside of John, and then 1 went over his head and hit a glass pane window, which again is another strange thing, because that was the window that they hit was on the far right side of the Dakota Building, and Mark David Chapman was standing. I mean, the bullets would have had to made a hard right turn to produce bullet holes in this glass. But anyhow, so we have the 3 bullets that were recovered in Lennon's jacket that evening, 1 that would remain lodged in him, and then there's 3 bullet holes in the pane glass lobby window. So to me, that seems like that's way more than 5 bullets. If you count them up, so you have 3 in his jacket, okay, 1 that remains in him, that's 4, and then 3 holes in the glass. And there's if you go to my blog, I have an article on there, the way things are going, and there's a big picture that they took, and it's very clear there's absolutely 3 bullet holes in that glass. So it's kind of difficult to argue that only 5 shots were shot, no matter how you look at it. And that right there, just that one point, is like obvious to me that something else happened than what we have been led to believe this entire time, because the math just doesn't add up there. And
so few journalists or investigators seem to have looked into this in 40 years. Here we are talking about it now.
I've never once heard that questioned, and it's like, that's just so strange to me. They talk about the JFK assassination all the time, and the magic bullets and all of that stuff, and all of that stuff's talked about. But this particular case with John Lennon is like, it's hushed. Like, nobody talks about it. And it's the strangest thing to me, because there's so many glaring discrepancies about everything.
It's like you say, there's an official narrative that's decided upon, and it's just trotted out decade after decade.
The thing is, even the official narrative goes a bit wonky. I mean, I've looked into the shooting, the actual nuts and bolts of it, if you like, what happened on the night, or what's said to have happened on the night. And I've got all the bits of paper here from the various websites and news sources, and I've printed all the sources up onto bits of paper, and I've got them all strewn across here in front of me. And you've got differing reports. I mean, for example, June 22nd, 1981, and I've got part of the transcript here from the competency hearing that Mark David Chapman took. Basically, I think this is one of the hearings where they were trying to find out if he was going to plead guilty or not guilty. I'm not sure if it was this particular hearing, but it was one of these kind of hearings where they're checking Mark David Chapman's statement. He's standing in court and he's giving them his version of accounts. And the judge says to him, "How many times did you shoot the gun?" And he said, 5 shots. And how many times did you strike the victim? And Chapman says 4. Right, fair enough. Okay. Mm-hmm. But then in an interview with Larry King in 1999, I think this was, one of the very few interviews that Mark David Chapman has ever done. One of the very few media interviews he's ever given. And again, just to point out, if he wanted to be famous, how come is it he's only done about 5 or 6 media interviews in 40 years?
Right.
Anyway.
And the first one was like 20 years later.
Yeah, something like,
yeah.
I think it was 7-8 years afterwards for a magazine article, I think.
Oh, right. Okay.
I think so. I'm not sure. But this one with Larry King was 1999. And in that, he says he fired 5 shots. Okay, 5 shots, not 4, 5 shots into his back. And there's also witness statements that were taken on the day and various other statements that were taken literally minutes and hours after the incident occurred. I've got a news report, a UPI and AP news report here. And this was, I'm assuming, given I'm reading it here and assuming by the style that it's written, that this is literally minutes, maybe an hour after or a couple of hours after it happened. And a spokesman says here that Lennon was shot 3 times. Okay, so we got 3 times there. Just turning the pages here on all these bits of paper I've got, and then we've got a witness by the name of Sean Strube. Now, he's one of the few witnesses that was there at the time, or so we're told was there. He didn't actually see anything. Okay, he didn't actually see anything. He says that by the time he got to actually see anything, it was when John Lennon was being taken into the back of the police car to be taken to the hospital, to be taken to Roosevelt Hospital, because apparently the police thought that John Lennon was in such a bad way that they couldn't wait. So they thought the best thing was to just get him into the back of the police car, not wait for the ambulance to arrive, and just get him straight to the hospital, get him in the. So that's what he saw. He saw Lennon going into the back of the car. Now he says that, and again I'm quoting here, this is his quote, he says, some people told of hearing 6 shots. So we've got 6 shots there, and then there's an unidentified female witness who spoke to a TV reporter, Channel 7 Eyewitness News. So again, this is just maybe presumably, minutes, hours, after the event occurred. And she didn't actually see much either. But what she says is, all of a sudden, I heard 5 or 6 shots. So again, it's this 6 shots, 5 shots, 3 shots. I don't know what's going on there. I mean, the thing is that if, if forgive me if I've got this wrong, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, guys. But from what I understand, John Lennon was hit in the left. All the bullets hit the left, the shoulder, and Mark David Chapman was said to have been standing on the right. Okay, isn't that right? Yeah, he was standing on the right. Yep. In fact, there is a diagram, and I think it's on your website, Desiree, isn't it? On one of your articles.
It is.
You've got an article or a diagram that was actually in the New York Times in an article, in a news report, the day after the shooting. And it's a diagram of how the shooting occurred. So you've got the limo where John Lennon came out of at the sidewalk, and then it's got this kind of diagram that shows the direction he walked in. Right. And it's got Chapman on the right, and him shooting and hitting Lennon in his back in the left.
It's those Kennedy magic bullets again.
Inside his body. So Chapman's on the right. Exactly. Is that possible? Can you do that? Is that possible? I'm not, like you say, Desiree, I'm not an expert with trajectories and so on. But can you stand on the right and shoot and hit someone in the left in their back? Can you do that in their shoulder area? Is that possible?
It's probably possible. Like I said, it would be. I would think it would be very difficult. It almost seems like he would be like a professional, being able to make those kinds of a shot. Not just some amateur that was doing this for fame, but yeah. So John and Yoko passed Chapman on his left. So Chapman was standing on the very right hand side of that doorway. John and Yoko go by him on the left. And supposedly, as soon as John passes, Chapman got into his combat position and fired. Some say he says, Mr. Lennon, to where John started to turn around. Yeah. And others said that didn't actually happen. But again, there's only a couple witnesses. Who knows?
Yeah, I know. I mean, this is the weird thing. Where are all these statements actually coming from? Because from what I can gather, Chapman never said he went into a combat stance. This is something that came out in various articles and books and what have you. But from what I understand, from having looked at what Mark David Chapman has said about all of this, from what he says took place, he never went into a combat stance, and he didn't say, because there is this narrative that as soon as John Lennon walked past him, he said, "Mr. Lennon," and John Lennon looked at him, turned round and looked at him. Right. Mark David Chapman has never said that happened. He just said he shot his back.
What do we know about Yoko's behaviours? What's Yoko said about all this? Because she was a witness.
Not much from what I can understand.
Not a whole lot, no?
Right.
No,
so Yoko was in front. Yoko walked out of the limo first, and she was about 20 steps or so in front of John. And so she was like kind of already in the safeguard of the building as this was happening. So she would have, I mean, at least if that's truly what happened, her back would have been completely turned to all this.
She would have heard the shots and then turned.
She would have heard the shots, but not seen what had transpired before that.
The thing is, if John Lennon had have turned, as one researcher I've noticed has picked up on, and good call on that researcher for picking it up. But if it's true that, if it's true, who knows? But if it's true that that Mark David Chapman did say Mr. Lennon, and John Lennon turned around, then how is it if he's standing on his right and John Lennon turns around? How could he have hit him in the back on the left?
He couldn't have. That's when he would have been in the chest, right? Because he would have turned, and then he would have been hit in the chest rather than in the back.
Right.
So yeah, very strange.
Very strange. And then I was going to say you've got this Dr. Halloran. I think his name is Dr. David Halloran, who was the main doctor at the emergency room at the Roosevelt Hospital when John Lennon was brought in, and when they did the emergency resuscitation. And he has said, and this is on video, it's on YouTube, you can find it if you look for Dr. Halloran. He says, check this. He had 4 shots over the front of his chest, 3 exit wounds at the back.
Mm-hmm.
What? But I thought he was shot in the back. And William Joseph Gamble, okay, another name I've picked up. He was a New York. He's now he became a New York City detective, but he was one of the officers who responded on the night of the shooting. And he has said he was shot in the chest. John Lennon was shot in the chest. That was his statement.
So we can spot all these discrepancies 40 years later, but apparently nobody at the time could.
Yeah.
Right. Or nobody talks about it, or
covering
something.
It up.
Right.
Or someone's covering it up. You know, there must have been another shooter there, whether it was Perdomo or not, because you've got the statement of Peter Cullen, a guy by the name of Peter Cullen. He was a patrolman for New York 20th Precinct, and I think he was the first or one of the first to turn up on the scene. He got the call and he turned up there, and everything was pretty fresh when he turned up there. So he turned up there with a gun in his hand, ready for anything. You know, it was still fresh. Everything was still going on. And apparently his first thought when he got there was that it was the handyman who was the shooter. And it was only when the doorman said that it was Chapman that Chapman was then approached. And according to Cullen, he couldn't believe it. It was like his instincts had been insulted, because his police instincts was to look towards the handyman. But he didn't.
And he also said that there were 3 men there that he didn't recognize, too. And from all of the other accounts, there wouldn't have been 3 men that he didn't recognize there. So, I mean, and that's separate from Perdomo, the doorman, because he said he saw Perdomo there, and Perdomo had informed him that, yes, Mark David Chapman was the shooter, and that he had just shot John Lennon. And so he had said there was other people there. But who were all these other people?
The people, and so again, you know, this brings us back to Perdomo. I'm not 100% convinced that Perdomo was the man. I think this might be one of those little red herrings that's been thrown in. I mean, we can go back to that if you want, 'cause as I say, this is a huge subject, and there's so much to remember about what we should turn back to and talk about again. You know, we're going all over the place here. And there's so much to remember. But I mean, the thing about Perdomo is, why didn't Perdomo? The story is that Perdomo said to Chapman after he shot Lennon, "Do you know what you just did?" Right. And they took the gun away from him, and I think it was the handyman actually. The elevator operator. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. It's a guy by the name of Joseph Meny, who was the Dakota elevator operator. He was asked by Perdomo because what Chapman did was he shot Lennon and then he dropped the gun and then he got Catcher in the Rye out of his pocket and started to read it. Mind control. But what happened was Perdomo is said to have said to this Joseph Meny, take the gun and just get rid of it. And as you say, Desiree, it was taken down an elevator shaft or something and taken down into the basement. First fact is, that's messing with police evidence. Who's to say that the gun that was taken down into the basement is the same gun that they gave to the police? Another thing is, seeing that Jose Perdomo was a quote-unquote security guard, why didn't he apprehend Mark David Chapman? Knowing that the gun had been taken away from him, why didn't he try to stop? Why didn't he try to at least apprehend him, get physical with him? Why didn't he just leave him there to read the book?
There's some accounts that say Perdomo turned to Chapman and said, "Go on, get out of here. Why are you still standing here? Go on." Encouraging the suspect to leave the scene.
Thank God he was on security that night, eh?
Which then...
It's just so weird.
Which then has some researchers questioning whether that Perdomo was his handler and he wanted Chapman to go to get out of there. Basically,
when he's supposed to have said to Chapman, "Do you know what you've done?" Some seem to think that Perdomo was his handler and he wants to check that Chapman is going to give that story to the cops. So when he says, "I've just shot John Lennon," he's right on script.
Yeah, he's thinking, phew. Perdomo's thinking, phew. Oh, all right, we're on the right road here. But, I mean, we're never going to really know what happened. And if the trajectories and everything match up with the wounds of John Lennon and so on and so forth. Because apparently the full autopsy report, I mean, you can get the death certificate, if I'm not mistaken. You can find that online. But you will not get the full autopsy report. And I know this because there's an author by the name of Salvador Astucia, who is the author of Rethinking Lennon's Assassination. And you can actually get this book online. You can read it online. And he tried to get the full autopsy report in 2003, 2002, 2003, and he was denied it. And he was denied it by the Director of Public Affairs at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, which is interesting because the Chief Medical Examiner back in 1980 was a man by the name of Dr. Elliot M. Gross. You don't hear a lot about this guy, and I'm surprised that no one's really looked into him. So I've done a little bit of digging, okay? So this is the guy, effectively, who, if I'm not wrong, who would have been effectively the boss of all the coroners in New York back in 1980. This was his job back in 1980. He was this state examiner, chief medical examiner. Now, in 1985, I've got a news story here with the headline that reads, "Dr. Gross accused of incompetence by state agency." The State Health Department, it says here in this report, after a 6-month investigation, has lodged 12 charges of gross incompetence or negligence against Dr. Elliot M. Gross, the city's chief medical examiner in New York. He was charged with professional misconduct in the handling of a series of cases, including deaths of people in police custody. And then in 1987, a couple of years after that, the mayor at the time of New York sacked him. He fired this Dr. Elliot M. Gross after allegations, and I'm quoting here from another news story, after allegations that his office may have altered autopsies to cover up police misconduct. And again, reading from this article, one such example was the case of a Michael Stewart in 1983 who died after being arrested by police. According to the official report, he lost consciousness after he became violent and had to be subdued by officers. He was automatically sent to a nearby hospital and he died there 13 days later, never regaining consciousness. Gross ruled in his report of the death that Stewart had succumbed to a cardiac arrest leading to his death. However, a physician who witnessed the autopsy on behalf of Stewart's family, concluded that he'd been strangled during his struggle with the police who arrested him. So, yeah. And then what happened in 1990? So fast forward 2-3 years later, those charges were dropped against Gross. They actually dropped those allegations against him. So he was, kind of free of that. But as it was the New York Times newspaper that initially caught on to Gross and exposed these charges and these allegations that then became charges. And according to a New York Times article, when Gross was sacked from his job, he left, and this I'm quoting again here from another article, he left behind an office in a state of chaos. An official report stated that the medical examiner's office, Gross's office, was plagued by, and I quote, thefts of gold teeth from bodies, and that bodies were frequently left in hallways because of a lingering storage problem. The report added other grisly details. For example, the morgue was forced to dispose of tons of accumulated body parts and blood-oozing storage cabinets. There were bloody footprints of morgue workers leading from improperly stored specimens, areas infested with rats and cockroaches, and body parts being sent for incineration in conventional black plastic bags. So
Jimmy Savile would have been at home there, wouldn't he?
Jeez.
He'd have loved to have worked there.
If there is any way you need a face mask,
horrible.
You know what I mean? So yeah, he lost his job, his New York medical examiner's job, and they dropped those charges, but it was too late by then. And he got a job. He got another job as a medical examiner in New Jersey, and also as a part-time assistant medical examiner for Atlantic County. And everything was going okay until 1998, and the case of Ellen Andros, who was the 31-year-old wife of a police officer. And what happened was she died, and it was said that her husband, her cop husband, was arrested because it was claimed that he was drunk and he strangled her. And Gross put that down in his report. He put that she died of strangulation. But another pathologist took a look at the body, and he discovered that no, she'd actually died of spontaneous coronary artery dissection, which is a rare condition. But as the pathologist stated at the time, back in 1998 or 1999, whenever it happened, yes, a rare condition, but Gross should have noticed it. So he got sacked again. In 2002. So that's the guy that was in charge of John Lennon's body at the time.
There is something we should get into the conversation, because there's probably people listening that will be screaming at us to cover it. And this is the idea that in some way John's assassination didn't actually take place and was faked. So this has been put forward by Miles Mathis, who claims this kind of thing a lot. And there are some other researchers that seem to think that the whole thing was a hoax. It was a put-up job and John never actually died. We should just address this, I guess. Any thoughts on this way of thinking?
I'll address it quickly. I don't know how much weight I put into it, honestly, but it's an interesting subject to go over, I suppose. But yeah, so the theory put forth by a few people is that this was all fake and a cover-up, and John Lennon is, living happily in seclusion in Canada or somewhere else of his choosing, I suppose. And one of the more significant things for me with that theory is almost everybody who saw John that night, from the police officers who put him into their squad car to the doctors that worked on him and the nurses that were there that evening, none of them seemed to recognize this person as John Lennon. None of them seemed to realize that it was actually John Lennon until his IDs were found in his clothes at the hospital, for example. And they're, oh, wow, this is John Lennon, kind of thing. And so I guess in that sense, that kind of does raise the case that, okay, possibly something more to this was going on. But I don't know how much more we should get into that or not.
It's crazy because there's a theory that Paul McCartney is really dead, but he's pretending to be alive. And John Lennon's really alive, but he's pretending to be dead.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I'll just echo you there, Desiree. Yeah, that was Dr. Halloran, the doctor I mentioned earlier. He said when John Lennon, quote unquote, John Lennon, question mark in brackets, was when they were trying to resuscitate him. One of the nurses said, "Hey, that looks like John Lennon," and Dr. Halloran is quoted as saying, "No, that's not John Lennon." And as you say, it's only when they found his wallet and the ID and everything that. But you know, if and there was a policeman as well, William Joseph Gamble. I think I mentioned him before. He said, and I quote, he'd lost so much blood. John Lennon had lost so much blood when he saw him that he was unrecognizable. I mean, you can take that in any way, which way you want, but I mean, you could say with the wallet. I mean, if you support this idea that it wasn't John Lennon, you could say that the wallet had been planted on him.
Sure.
I mean, you know, you see, I don't.
If it was all planned ahead of time, they could have planned all of that. You know what I mean? It's
that's the thing.
You know, so
it's a bit of an elaborate kind of fix.
There's also a theory that Chapman didn't really go to jail. He did the odd interview that makes it appear like he's in jail, but really, you know, he never did, and he's just out there somewhere. That's another extension to that.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, if no one's read the Miles Mathis article, go take a look and see what you think. I'm not convinced that he puts forward the thesis or the theory, if you like, that the guy that is now going around as a so-called John Lennon lookalike act, an entertainer by the name of Mark Stacer, is actually John Lennon. But I've looked at the pictures of Mark Stacer, this John Lennon professional lookalike act. He does not look like John Lennon to me. Maybe it's just the way I perceive things, but to me, he does not look like he's passing himself off as that he's actually the John Lennon, the real John Lennon. You know, Miles Mathis sees it like that, but I can't see it myself. The only other thing that I would say makes me wonder whether it was all faked is the actual picture of John Lennon's dead body. Now, if anyone's gone see, if you look at the picture of John Lennon's dead body, it just does not look real. It looks like it's been photoshopped or it's been.
It looks like it's wax.
It looks like it's wax. Yeah, the face part looks real, like the nose and the eyes and the hair. But when it gets to the ears and the neck, it kind of it looks like it's a rubber mask that's not been fastened properly, and it's like splayed out. It's like, you know what I mean? Like you say, it's almost like a wax model. And why have they got the black bag right up to his neck? You can't see the body. It doesn't look real.
That's
you have
very
to go
true.
and see it. So,
and especially with what you just came out with the medical examiner and all of his kind of shady things, you know, I've heard that his body was kind of purposely left in the hallway so that people could take pictures, you know, kind of thing, you know, instead of being respectful with it and, you know, closing up the body bag and putting him where he's supposed to be, you know, he was just kind of put off to the side there for a minute with his head revealed, you know, like stuff like who would do that? I mean, I guess if you have a shady medical examiner and he's making, you know, 10,000 by letting somebody take a picture of that or whatever. But, you know, at the same time, it's like, why would anyone just leave him sitting out there, you know, in a body bag, half exposed after he's been pronounced dead? And it's just weird stuff. So, yeah.
And we've got the fact that this took place in the Dakota Building as well, and we've mentioned some of the really strange connections between the Dakota and Rosemary's Baby and Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate and Manson. Those connections just go on forever, so it's a very auspicious setting, isn't it?
Yes, all things that we've already discussed on other episodes. So
indeed, yeah.
That's definitely something I go back to. I would like to, I feel like we kind of skipped over a couple of things that I'd really like to go back and kind of refresh a little bit about. First and foremost, I think the day of the actual shooting that took place, you know, as we had mentioned, there was only a couple of witnesses there. But one thing that is never, I think I'm the only person that I've ever noticed to bring up this question. Is
I know what you're going to say. Yeah, you are definitely.
And it's like, so to me, it is so obvious and blaring that I can't believe that nobody has ever discussed this before. But so I can't be the only one. But anyhow, John and Yoko were coming back from the recording that evening at the record plant, which is all the way across town, right? So they supposedly are coming back in their limo or a limo that was supplied to them from the record plant. Nobody's really sure. I can't find that information, but it does appear that they came back in a limo regardless. And the limo pulls up and lets them out on the street, which first of all is very odd, because he could have pulled up to the secure exit of the Dakota archway there and let them out there. They would have been completely secure and none of this might not have happened. But anyhow, the limo driver pulls up right in front of that large entryway to the Dakota Building, and they get out, and he's essentially blocking not only the view of what was about to happen, but from any other cars getting in or out of that driveway there. And so John, Yoko gets out and John gets out, and all of that happens, and apparently the limo is still parked there. So that would be another witness. First of all, whoever that driver was of that limo would be a witness. And second of all, the cops supposedly came 2 minutes after that and put John in their squad car. Well, if it was such a dire scene right there, they could have put John in that limo and taken him away. And there's no mention of where that limo went. Who the limo driver was. He could have been interviewed. He would have had the perfect eyewitness view of exactly what happened that evening, because he had just literally dropped them off. And you also have to remember this whole entire scene was in a span of like 10 minutes. So Mark David Chapman supposedly started firing at like 10:54. And John Lennon was pronounced dead at the hospital at like 11:12. So we're talking 11, 12, 15 minutes total this entire thing happened in. So it, just right in succession. It was almost like it was just put right into place. Shots fired, police on the scene, suspect arrested, Lennon's at the hospital, Lennon pronounced dead. They made the announcement on the Monday night football game, which at 11:30, that must have been a really long game for them to have announced it at Monday Night Football at 11:30, 11:45 at night, so this was all so fast and so rapid. And they seemed to have all of the information, and they knew exactly who did it and how many shots were fired and how he died and all of these things within minutes. It's just amazing. But that limo driver, I just don't understand how that question has never been raised. He was right, or he or she, I don't know, but right there in front of the scene, blocking the scene, had a perfect view of exactly everything that happened, and not even maybe just that, since there was no investigation, but almost everybody else has made money off of this story, right? He's never given an account. He's never given an interview. We don't even know his name. We don't even know if the limo was the Lennons or from the record plant, or where it even came from. Yeah. So it's very, very, very strange that that question has never been raised, and nobody seems to know, who that person was, or where the limo went afterwards, or where it came from in the first place. So it's like the mystery driver.
Yeah, exactly, and that's really good work there, Desiree. Because I've never come across that. It's on your website, Number 9 blog. I've never seen the limo driver mentioned anywhere else, and bizarre, isn't it? You would have thought if someone wanted to cash in, I was, with the headline reading, I was there, I saw what happened, you'd think they'd want to cash in on it, but what's going on? Why the silence?
Right.
I just want to tie up another loose end, and it's what I was talking about earlier with regards to Hawaii and the suicide attempt, Mark David Chapman's suicide attempt. What was basically going, and this will kind of maybe explain where he got the money. to go on this round the world trip that you were talking about, Desiree. Basically, what happened with the thing with Mark David Chapman was he like I said earlier, he was a bit of a coaster. He'd have one job, then he'd drop out, then he'd get another job, then he'd drop out, and then he'd get another job, and he was doing this all across the US. And he was trying to get this university degree so he could get the permanent job at the YMCA instead of just being a camp counselor. That he could, instead of that, be a permanent employee. But it never happened. It just didn't work out. He kept dropping out of college and not following his studies properly, and life wasn't working out for him. So what he decided to do was to go to Hawaii and to start a new life in Hawaii. He thought, well, the mainstream version of events tells us that he thought to himself, hey, why don't I try Hawaii? Nice weather, tropical type scenery, different scene. Maybe it'll lift me out of my bad spirits and I'll be able to get a job, and so on and so on. But it didn't quite work out that way, and he fell into this depression. And this would have been around 1977. And as we mentioned earlier, he contemplated suicide, and he actually went ahead and tried to commit suicide, so we're told. And what he did was he got a hose and attached it to his car exhaust and placed it inside the car. And apparently what happened was the hose burned, it melted, and it was a failed attempt. And he hooked up with by this point, he'd actually already hooked up with a psychiatric social worker. He'd been assigned with a psychiatric social worker because before the suicide attempt, he'd actually called a suicide hotline. I think I mentioned this before. But in between the suicide hotline and being assigned with this psychiatric worker, as that was going on, he also tried to commit suicide. But his psychiatric social worker she was interviewed, and she's actually said that maybe he wasn't trying really to kill himself, that it was kind of like attention seeking or a cry for help or something like that. So, but here's the weird thing, okay, and think of mind control here, okay. Now she has actually been interviewed, and she has said that she examined Mark David Chapman after this apparent suicide attempt, and she was determined, or she concluded, I should say, that he wasn't psychotic, he wasn't mentally ill. But she thought, never mind that he isn't mentally ill, she said she actually admitted him into a psychiatric ward in a hospital, even though he wasn't mentally ill. She thought, what the hell? I'm going to admit him anyway to check him over. Right. Now, if you're thinking mind control, maybe that's a little telltale sign there. So we've got here a potential mind control victim who's been placed in a mental institution. Okay. And he stayed there for 2 weeks, and then he was let out, and he got a job there. He was let out and he got a job there as the maintenance man, and then as a junior member of the customer relations department. And it was at this time, I think it was 1978, a year later or a year or so later, that he went on this round the world trip, this very expensive round the world trip. Now, according to mainstream events, whether you want to believe this or not, he got the money as a loan from the hospital, the Castle Memorial Hospital, which is based in Hawaii. The hospital actually gave him a loan to go on this round the world trip. Okay, fine. But as some cynics have asked, yeah, okay, fair enough. But why would you lend so much money? Can you imagine how expensive it would have been? Because Desiree, you've decked out, you've sketched out the actual places that he went to across the world earlier on. Can you imagine how expensive that would have been? You're going to lend money to a man who is a junior maintenance man, who is a junior member of the customer relations department. How is he going to pay that back? Such a huge amount of money for a round the world trip. How is someone on his wage, on his salary, going to ever pay that back?
And not just that, but he was a former patient there. Right. So he probably already owed them money for, I mean, if that's what happened, right? His medical bills and his stay there. So how, why? Makes no sense at all. No sense.
Always more questions than answers.
Yes.
Yeah, go on.
And to take, you're essentially asking for time off for vacation, and not just time off and vacation, but for them to pay for your entire vacation around the world. Like
around the world.
It's just so weird. Like, who would do that?
Delhi, Israel, London, was it Holland? Wow, I mean, they're not just like a few places, like round the world, literally.
Right, yeah. Geneva, London, Paris, Dublin, Tokyo.
And apparently when
Bangkok.
when he was in London, he was taking in West End shows, and he wasn't,
and he had a lot of art. I don't know if you read anything about that, but he collected very expensive art, like museum quality pieces. Like he had
Salvador Dali. He had an actual Salvador Dali piece. Yeah.
How does one, accumulate things like that?
Again, apparently, according to the official version of events, that was from he borrowed some money off his mum, who had just got divorced, and it was her divorce settlement, and she lent him the money to buy these loads of paintings. I think one was a Norman Rockwell, I think, as well, who's a painter, and Salvador Dali. I'm looking here at the list. I've got the list in front of me. Yeah, just amazing, all these lithographs and things that were worth thousands of dollars.
And it's funny because a lot of when I was reading on this stuff, a lot of these art pieces that he collected, to me, and maybe it's just me, and but resonated a lot with the types of things that Yoko collected. Have you noticed that? And also just his wife was of Japanese descent, like Yoko, and and the around the world trip. So John Lennon took a around the world trip that was kind of similar, just a year prior, or maybe it was a year and a half prior before to his death. He did a very similar trip to that, and Yoko had suggested that he do this, and it was.
Yeah, and he signed on his last day at work when another job that he'd left the Castle Memorial. I think he'd had an argument with one of the staff, or there was a disagreement, and he got a job as a security guard in Hawaii there you go, security guard for some apartments. That's his last job before the shooting. Security guard for some apartments. And when he signed, so again, there's this correlation between the Dakota and security guards and Perdomo, security guard. So apparently when he signed his name out to leave work for the last day when he left, it was John Lennon. He signed out as John Lennon, which was noticed afterwards. But yeah, quickly, I just want to say that I've got some reservations about the Perdomo thing. So I don't remember actually what we mentioned about Perdomo, but I think it was basically the fact that Jose Perdomo is said to have been involved in the Bay of Pigs project, which was a CIA US government-backed project to kind of try and overthrow Castro. Jose Perdomo is said to have been anti-Castro Cuban exile who was then taken in by the CIA to do this. Now, according to Frank Sturgis, who was a CIA agent, and he was jailed for the Watergate burglaries when the President Nixon linked burglaries of the Democratic Building in 1972, I think it was, or maybe earlier than that, when they a team of Nixon's men burglarized the offices of the Watergate building where the Democrats were based, where they had offices, and they wiretapped and bugged it and burglarized it and so on. So he was jailed for that. Frank Sturgis was a CIA agent, and he was jailed for the Watergate burglaries. Now, he apparently knew a Jose Perdomo, and Frank Sturgis claimed that the Jose Perdomo that he knew died of natural causes in 1974. And he was going also by the alias of Joaquin Sangenis. And apologies to anyone of Cuban extraction for murdering that pronunciation there. But yeah, I mean, this is according to Frank Sturgis. Do you believe a CIA agent for a start? I mean, would you believe his claims? But this hasn't been corroborated by anyone else. This is according to Frank Sturgis back in the day, that this is what happened to Jose Perdomo, a.k.a. Joaquin Sangenis, that he died in 1974.
Just to muddy the waters a bit more.
Just to muddy the waters a bit more. And then it could be that he died, but then again, it could be that he took on an alias, because apparently there is a Jose Perdomo that goes. But the thing is, right, and I'm sorry I'm going off, but it's really confusing to me, right? The thing is that Jose Perdomo had not been named by the media with regards to the Lennon assassination until 1987. So we're talking 7 years, right? For 7 years, his name was not mentioned. He was always mentioned. He was always, whenever the doorman was mentioned with regards to the shooting in the mainstream media, it was always as the doorman or the security guard. It was only in an article in 1987 by James Gaines, and it was a Chapman backed article. It was for People magazine, and you can find this online. Actually, I don't remember the title of the article, but you can find it online. And this is the first time that it was actually named Jose Perdomo, quote unquote, the doorman at the Dakota that night. And it also mentions, because what Chapman was doing before he shot Lennon, he was hanging around outside the Dakota because there were a lot of fans always standing outside the Dakota waiting for John Lennon. This was like one of those regular things that was
Matt,
going.
I wanted to ask you, just as a loose end, there's this famous photo of Lennon signing Chapman's copy of Catcher in the Rye. It's all over the internet. Who was supposed to have taken that photo?
A man by the name of Paul Goresh.
That's it.
And he just passed away a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But
he was another fan that was just hanging out there, is he?
Yeah.
He was another fan. He actually got fairly close to John and Yoko over the years, but only after this double fantasy came back out. Before that, he was kind of, I think John had yelled at him a couple times because he kept trying to take his picture, like would wait for him to come out and take their picture and all those kinds of things. And I think he like swindled his way into the Dakota one time saying he was a TV repairman or something like that. And ended up, they found out that he wasn't a TV repairman and was kicked out and all this stuff. But yeah, that's who was supposedly took the picture of Mark David Chapman and John Lennon that night.
You do wonder if he was, because he was taking lots, because as you say, he was hanging around outside the Dakota a lot. He was one of those fans that was always standing outside. It's isn't it? Don't you think it's a bit strange that he never took more photos of Mark Chapman or indeed Jose Perdomo?
Right.
Because he's taking pictures. Apparently, what Goresh was doing, he was taking pictures of John Lennon as he was coming in and out of the Dakota to go to various engagements, getting into a limo or going to the store to buy something. And he would take pictures of Lennon on the street. I think it's on the cover of the 7-inch single, "Watching the Wheels."
That's his picture.
That's his picture of John and Yoko walking out the Dakota. So how come that we don't see any of all the photos that he took of John, and he took many, many, many candid photographs? How come we don't see any of him? Of Mark Chapman hanging around outside, apart from this one where John signs the double fantasy album that Mark David Chapman has bought. How come we don't see any pictures of any of the other staff? For example, Jose Perdomo.
Right.
The thing is with Jose Perdomo is, so, we don't. This is why I'm a bit suspicious, right? We don't hear his name until 1987 in this article, and in this article it explained the way his name is explained. It's explained that Mark David Chapman, on one of the many occasions that he was turning up outside the Dakota waiting for John to come out so he could shoot him, he got into, this is how the article explains it, he got into a conversation with the doorman, whose name is Jose Perdomo, and Jose talks about the Bay of Pigs and the JFK assassination. Now it doesn't say that he's
involved.
Convenient. That's convenient. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't say that he was involved in it. It just says they just stood there and just began to talk about this stuff, just off the cuff. It's just got me a little bit suspicious. And then you realise, if how many Jose Perdomos are there out there? Maybe the guy, I'm suspicious, but I will concede that maybe the Jose Perdomo that they say is, maybe it is Jose Perdomo, right? We're talking about the security guard outside the Dakota. Okay, but how many Jose Perdomos are there in the world? Is this Jose Perdomo regular guy, or is this Jose Perdomo CIA agent?
Jose Perdomo was definitely working there that night. A man named Jose Perdomo because he is mentioned, the police officers mentioned that, their statements that they give, they mentioned specifically Jose Perdomo, the doorman. So we know a man named Jose Perdomo was working as the doorman that evening, but whether that man is linked to the Jose Perdomo of the CIA and the Bay of Pigs and all of that, that's kind of where the question is raised, right?
Well,
yes.
guys, we just hit the 2-hour mark now, so we should probably wrap it up there, I guess. I don't think we're going to find the answer to that question anyway. We're just going to puzzle over it and be none the wiser. But we've had a great conversation. I think this time next year, we're going to be finding ourselves marking the 20th anniversary of George Harrison's passing and going back over all of that, which we have covered on previous shows. But I think we've done pretty well here in revisiting the Lennon event 40 years later. Hopefully we've done it justice. Do you just want to wrap up by reminding people about your blogs, and are there any new articles forthcoming that people should look out for?
Oh, I'll go ahead and take that one first. So I have the number 9 blog, and not too much new coming out. Honestly, I'm putting together a full kind of John Lennon tribute that I plan to hopefully post this podcast on as well. Not too much new. I love John Lennon. I know that there's a lot of strange things about and all that, but I do have great respect for him, and I do that. All of this, for me at least, comes out of a place of respect. I really feel that if something is not quite right by what we've been led to believe about his murder or lack of murder, depending on what version of events you go with, I do feel that it's out of respect that we should really have an investigation and figure out what really happened that day, and I feel horrible. I can't believe that he's now officially been dead as long as he was alive. He was 40 years old when he was killed. This is his 40th anniversary. So that's a very long span of time that, nobody really seems to question much about. They just kind of accept, and it's a very tragic and sad story. But I do hope that someday some of these questions, these nagging, lingering questions, will be answered once and for all. And maybe we have to wait a little longer until certain people have passed or something. But I do hope that one day it all comes out. So
sure,
I appreciate all of your work and dedication on this, you guys. I think it was a great show. So thank you. Lovely.
Thank you. Yeah, great.
So Matt, what you got going on?
Oh, loads. Wow. Loads of articles to come, both on my site, Conspiro Media, and also on the Occult Beatles. Just so many different things. I won't go into them now. But check those sites out. You've got Conspiro Media, which in recent years, it started in 2011, 2012, sometime around then. But in more recent years, in the last 2-3 years or so, it's been taking a look at the 1960s countercultural scene of London and of Britain. So it's kind of like partly inspired by Dave McGowan's work with Laurel Canyon and what he discovered with regards to the US and Laurel Canyon. I thought I'd take a look. I'm taking a look at the London scene and London, which is sort of mostly where the countercultural scene was being sort of engineered, a good word, that, engineered, and where it was happening. So go take a look at that site. There's not a lot of regular articles on that site at the moment because I've been doing years and years of research, background research into that. But but do check it out. That's what that site is now dedicated towards. It never used to be. It used to be more of a topical thing about music, the music scene of the current music scene, if you like. But I've turned my attention towards the 60s. So that's what Conspiro Media is all about. And then you've got my site, The Occult Beatles. And then there's Conspiro Media at Facebook. And if you go there, you get a mixture of the two sites and more stuff that you don't get on either site. So, check those out. Yeah. And thanks, guys.
Yeah, lovely.
All right,
Thanks.
great. And we'll see everyone for Magical Mystery Talk episode 5 at some point in 2021. Cheers for now.